how to deal with late payers or non-payers. That's what we're going to talk about in this lesson. And this is something that can cause a lot of anxiety if you're not careful. Because when someone doesn't pay or they're late to pay, if you're anything like me, all these questions start running through your mind and you can really get sleepless nights about it. So having a process of how to deal with these kind of things, and if they do happen, and unfortunately they do happen to every business at some point, having a system in place will just help you to stay under control when this situation does happen. Really, when it comes to late payers, there are sort of 3 stages of lateness, we could say. So we're going to talk through those 3 stages and talk about each one individually. The first stage is the payment's just a little bit late. So for example, you might have set your payment terms at 7 days and you get to the 8th day and they've still not paid. What do? Well, a gentle reminder is usually all that's needed. So it could be, for example, that they've just forgotten. It slipped their mind and that's why you've not got paid. And so just sending them a little reminder, maybe sending them a copy of the invoice again, is all that it will take to get them a little nudge. And often people will feel a bit embarrassed and that they didn't remember to pay. They'll apologise and they'll pay you straight away. So that early stage of payment lateness is not really a big deal, but that is the crucial stage really when you want to nip it in the bud early, because the longer you leave it, the more difficult it is to get paid in general for these kind of situations. And in terms of slightly late payments, what can really help is just having an automated system to send reminders to customers for payments. And again, Tradeify is a great way of doing this, because in Tradeify, in the emailing, in the invoicing system, they will automatically send a reminder to the customer if they haven't paid yet after a certain amount of time. So the customer gets a little nudge and you don't have to do anything. It's all automated through Tradeify. So my recommendation is to have some kind of payment situation set up that sends people reminders and just gives them that little nudge when they're getting due for the payment and if they're late for the payment as well. Now, obviously, setting your payment terms in advance is really important when it comes to this, because you need to set your customer expectations so they know when they're supposed to pay in order for them to pay on time, or not, as the case may be. If they don't know what the terms are, they won't know the difference. For us, most of our invoices are expected to be paid as soon as they're received. So the due date is the same date as the invoice date. And that makes it clear to the customer that as soon as they get the invoice, they need to pay it. And then we're all square. Because usually when we send our invoices, the job is already done. And if anyone questions this, I just explain to the customers very simply that I'm not a credit agency, and I usually like to use the illustration of like a food stall. Maybe you go and buy a coffee, you don't say, oh, can I pay for it in 7 days? Go and buy a hot dog or a burger from a burger stand. Do you ever ask them if you can buy it now and eat it now and pay for it later? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. When you receive a product, you expect to pay for it then and there. An electrician service is much more expensive than a hot dog or a cup of coffee, so why should you expect to just be able to pay for it a long time later? It just doesn't make any sense. So most customers understand that cash flow is very important, and they appreciate the need to pay quickly, and they will do so. But as I say, some people just forget, or maybe your invoice just ended up in their junk mail folder. That can easily happen, and it's not their fault, because they didn't even realise that you'd sent them an invoice. So that little reminder and just checking in with the customer to check they've received your invoice okay is very important. And that is usually all that it takes to get paid 90% of the time for customers who are a little bit late. There's something to think about here though, because you may get customers, well, you will get customers who are habitually late at paying. And you always have to chase them up, and it's really annoying. So you might want to think about those kind of customers. How can you get them to pay quicker? Maybe you get them to pay in advance for work if you find that they're habitually late, or maybe you want to just think about cutting them off as a customer after a while, because at the end of the day, you can't have customers being habitually late in paying you, especially when they take weeks or months to pay you. It can cause a real cash flow problem for your business. So you might just want to have a frank conversation with them to say, look, we have noticed that you habitually pay late and we really need you to pay quickly, otherwise we're not going to be able to work for you anymore. Now, that's not an easier conversation to have, admittedly, but sometimes just laying it down straight with people can make them realise that if they want to keep your services, they're going to have to improve their payments. You can say something like this: I really appreciate your business, you're a valuable client, but my business cash flow is important and I can't afford to have you paying late so often. So unfortunately, if you pay late again, we won't be able to work for you anymore. And probably that'll just give them the little kick that they need to just be more punctual when it comes to paying. So that's stage one, when payments are just a little bit late. No big deal really, not too difficult to deal with. But what happens when weeks and even months have gone by and you've still not got paid by a customer? And maybe you've chased them up a few times and they've said, yeah, I'll get it paid, and then it just doesn't happen. Maybe they keep making excuses and you start to get the feeling that there's something going on here, and you start to really worry that you're not actually going to get paid at all. The important thing with these kind of customers is to contact them, and generally just making contact with them over the phone is a really good idea. Have a frank conversation with them, explain to them how late the payment is, because maybe they didn't realise, maybe they think it's only a couple of weeks, but it's actually a couple of months. So explain to them that their payment is now however many weeks overdue, 6 weeks overdue or 4 weeks overdue or whatever it is. That can sometimes be the nudge that they need to just bring them back to reality and get them to pay you quickly. So talk to them over the phone if possible. That personal touch, I find, really helps, because they realise that you are a human being at the end of the day. Just like them, you need money to pay your bills. And just try to be kind and understanding. There's no need to be aggressive or pushy. Just find out from them why they haven't paid. Because maybe there's a genuine reason. I mean, we all get into difficult situations sometimes. So for example, maybe they've had a family disaster. Maybe they have had a bereavement or something. Something really terrible has happened. Maybe they've been really ill, or a family member has been ill, and they've been so consumed by that they just haven't really had time to deal with all their bills lately. It could be that it's as simple as that, and it's understandable. And then maybe you just want to give them a little bit more of a grace period to get that invoice paid. Now, some people just can't afford to pay you, and that is a bit of a problem. And it's unfortunate really, because they shouldn't have employed your services if they couldn't afford to pay you in the first place. But maybe something happened. Maybe a bill came in out of the blue that they didn't expect, and so now they literally don't have the money in the bank account to pay you. Those kind of customers might ask you for a bit of a grace period, say, can you wait until next month, because then when I get paid I can pay you, something like that. And depending on the customer and your relationship with them, you might be okay with that. You might just be understanding and say to them, yeah, that's fine, but I really do need payment as soon as you get your wages in for the month, please. But on the other hand, it could be that you've got a customer who's being a little bit sneaky, a little bit suspicious in the way that they're acting, and you just don't quite trust what they're saying. Maybe they keep making excuses that just don't really seem to add up. And maybe you think that they're just lying to you. So depending on your relationship with the customer and how you feel about them, that will really depend on how you will deal in this kind of situation. Sometimes something as simple as offering a credit card payment solution can help, because it will give them that extra time to actually pay their credit card company, but at least you will get paid quicker yourself. They can put it on their credit card and then they can pay it out of their bank later on, but you'll still get paid. So that's quite a good solution sometimes if you've got an online credit card payment system. Really good to have in these kind of situations. That situation just enables you to get paid without having the pressure of them having to do a transfer from their main account, which they might just not have the money in. But again, this is where getting payments in advance for larger jobs is really important. We talked about that earlier, because it avoids all of this hassle in the first place Because maybe when they employed you, they had the money there already in the account, but they're just not very good at managing their finances, and so they've spent it on something else. And now, when it comes to paying you, they've not got the money, and that's completely unfair on you. If you'd have asked for a 50% deposit up front, so that would cover your materials, that would help the situation to be a little bit less painful for you. So those are the situations where somebody is very, very late at paying, but they do actually eventually pay. And usually, I'd say 99% of customers are either just a little bit late, or they may take a few weeks or months, but they do pay eventually with a lot of chasing up. But the third stage is really the trickiest one. This is when people either refuse to pay you, or they basically disappear off the face of the earth and you can't contact them. They kind of go AWOL, so to speak. You try to contact them, you don't hear anything back. They're ignoring your phone calls, they're not responding to your emails, whatever it might be. Or it could be a company that you're working for and they actually go bust. They go bankrupt. What do you do in these kind of situations? Well, if they're refusing to pay you and they don't have a genuine reason why, then you've basically got to try and come up with some kind of agreement with them. So usually people will only refuse to pay you if they think they've got a genuine reason. For example, they don't think that the work you did was up to the standard they expect, or they weren't happy with some aspect of the work. And we'll talk about that next in how to handle complaints. But some people might just refuse to pay for a reason that you don't agree with. And in that case, you could decide to take them to the small claims court and basically fight your corner there and see if you can get them to be forced to pay. That's an avenue that you can pursue, but I would say it's good to speak to a legal advisor or speak to your accountant about that kind of thing, because there are a lot of factors to consider if you want to go down that route. And if you do have a legal advisor, that's always a good first port of call. Now, the other option is a debt collection agency, and this is useful if they go they disappear, they refuse to contact you and refuse to pay, because debt collection agencies are professionals at getting money out of people, basically. So if you don't want all the hassle of trying to chase this person up, trying to get in contact with them when you just can't get in contact with them, then you can hand over the debt to the debt collection agency. And what happens is they will take a percentage of that charge. So say the customer owes you £1,000, they might charge you 30% of that as their fee. But you're almost guaranteed to get that £700 that's remaining after their fees. And you might think, well, at least that's better than nothing. But again, that's quite an extreme measure and something that you want to tread carefully on. Now, there's the other situation where companies go bankrupt. And sometimes in liquidating the company, you will get allocated some of the money. But if there's no money left at all, there's sometimes nothing you can do about that. So the other thing that you can do in all of these situations, this is an option in all of these situations, is you could just cut your losses and you can just forget about it. Just write it off basically as a loss, learn from it, and move on. And in that case, obviously you don't get any money, but you can just forget about it and move on and be more careful about choosing your customers in future, which you just might prefer to have that peace of mind to not have to worry about it. But whether you decide to do that usually depends on how much the debt is, depends on if you can actually afford to let it go and absorb it into the cost of your business, or if you can't afford to. And it also depends on your relationship with a customer. If it's a long-time customer and this once they just really can't pay you, or something bad has happened, maybe you decide to just write it off to preserve the peace with that customer. But that is really up to you as a business owner. So it's those three main steps that you can take, basically. Write it off, small claims court, or debt collection agency. Those are the three that you can kind of take as your final steps to deal with non-payers or late payers. What I would say about this is there is a secret to avoiding all the pain of having to go through this whole process in the first place, and that is picking the right customers from the start. And I tell you from my experience, I have had late payers and I have had non-payers, and I've learnt the hard way from both of those that you need to be very selective in who you will work for. And if you have any suspicion or bad feeling about the character of the customer who's approached you to ask for work, the best thing to do are either charge them the full amount up front so that you know you're going to get paid, or just refuse to work for them. So, for example, I've recently just accepted a job from a client who something just didn't feel quite right about the way they contacted us. The emails were a bit weird and the name was a bit weird, and it just felt a little bit suspicious. So I thought, well, rather than refusing to work for them, what I'll do is just ask for full payment in advance. And then there's kind of nothing that can go wrong, in that you've already been paid even before you go to do the job. So there's no risk of them turning around and not paying you at the end. And if they say then, oh, no, I'm not going to pay you in advance, well, that's fine. You can just say to them, sorry, in that case, we won't be able to work for you this time. So that kind of helps you to make the decision to not work for them, because if they won't pay you in advance, then maybe they weren't planning on paying you at all. But the other thing you can do, and you should do this from time to time, if you've got a bad feeling in your gut about a customer, is just don't take them on. Even if you're a bit desperate for work at the moment, and this is where I'll tell you a story, of when I was very, very newly qualified. I'd very newly taken over my dad's business. Somebody called me up out of the blue and wanted a load of work doing for his mobile home situation. You know, on a kind of mobile home site, maybe you're starting to get the picture. And he came out with all the classics. Oh, I'll pay you in cash. And he wanted to pay me in cash at the end of each day. Well, all of this sounded very appealing to me as a young, naive electrician. So I went there, I did the first day of work, and at the end of the day, he paid me in cash. I think it was like £500 or something like that. And I was thinking, oh, this is great. You know, I got my first day of labour paid, plus some of the materials, and I thought, brilliant. So I came back the next day, carried on working, and I didn't see him. He wasn't around anymore. Came back the next day and did a bit more work, and I spent probably a week working at this site. I did a really nice job, very, very thorough, beautiful installation on this place, and then I sent him the final bill. And he did exactly what we talked about in stage 3. Well, he basically kind of made lots of excuses at first about paying. Then he just went AWOL and I couldn't contact him. He wasn't answering the phone. I chased him up for months. And eventually he got very, very aggressive with violent threats. And at that point I just said, okay, I'm just going to write it off, because it wasn't worth the anxiety for me. I think it was a couple of £1,000s or something like that he owed me in the end, which was not a small amount for me at that time. And it was a difficult decision to just let it go. But for me, that was kind of the only way, because he was the kind of person who was above the law, shall we say, and he could have basically done a lot of harm to my family if I pushed it too hard. So I decided to just cut my losses and just get out of there in the end. But you know, I learned the hard way that I need to be really careful with who I choose to work for in the future. Because alarm bells should have started ringing as soon as he contacted me. You know, the whole I'll pay you in cash thing, who he was, where he lived, and all that kind of stuff. It should have rung alarm bells to me, but I was just very naive and I believed people too easily back then. And he seemed very friendly, you know, so I just fell for it and really got hurt and learned the hard way. There's another experience I wanted to share with you, which is actually my dad's experience, and this was from working with a large building contractor on a construction project. It was building a swimming pool, and there was basically this builder that my dad was working for who was the main contract, and they were building this swimming pool, brand new swimming pool. It was a kind of a renovation situation, big project, and we worked on it for about 3 months when I was an apprentice. We basically rewired this entire leisure centre with a swimming pool, and it had a gym and changing rooms and reception and all this stuff. It wasn't the contractor themselves that were dodgy as such, but actually the contractor went bankrupt right near the end of the job. And because my dad hadn't been chasing up the payments, they owed him about 25 grand. And basically it all just disappeared when the company went bust. He was left with nothing. And it almost sent my dad's company bankrupt. I remember the time when it happened, the stress and anxiety that he went through because of it. It was like the problem really was putting your eggs in one basket. Never a good idea to have one big client that you just work for a long, long time who owes you a lot of money. And the other problem was not getting paid enough in advance, because if he'd have got paid in advance to cover the materials, then at least that would have covered his costs for the materials, and it would have been just the labour which was lost, which, you know, he'd already paid thousands of pounds for materials which were there in the building. You know, he'd already installed them, and those materials are still at use today. I remember my dad saying to me, he just felt like going in there and just ripping everything out. You know, he was so frustrated by the situation because the swimming pool had paid the contractor, but the contractor hadn't paid my dad, and it was really soul destroying to see how much hard work he put into it and that he didn't get paid at the end. And as I say, it could have taken him under. So what did I learn from that situation? Well, what I learned was to not put your eggs in one basket with one big contractor, not allow them to owe you a lot of money. You know, if you do work for one person, get them to pay you regularly. Now, luckily, my dad had enough of a buffer in the company to be able to survive, and he did just survive, and he recovered from that. But it was a really, really close call. And the lesson is just be so careful who you choose to work for. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Try as much as possible to get paid up front, and that will help you to avoid the situation where a late payer or a non-payer actually causes the collapse of your business. So I hope this lesson has been of value to you. I know it's a little bit of a horrible one to think about. It's a little bit of a depressing subject, but you do need to be prepared and have processes in place so that if and when it does happen, and it will unfortunately happen to you at some point, you can be prepared to cope with it, to deal with it in the right way so that it won't affect your business too negatively.